guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be watching a video called Here's Why Driving in Europe is Better Than America, an American's Perspective. And start. Oh, is this because they're better drivers? Didn't thought of that.
I love driving.
Okay.
And I especially love driving in Europe. I've been living in Europe for about 2 years now, originally from Orlando, Florida.
Well, you're from Florida.
I've lived in Amsterdam for about 2 years now. Amsterdam isn't exactly a car place, but I've always been a car person, and I've always loved driving. What I like about living in Europe is that European drivers are excellent, especially compared to American drivers.
It's because they follow the rules.
I was inspired for this video after watching a video by Tedward, which I'll link in the description below. In his video, he was explaining why Americans don't use a 3-lane highway correctly. And it got me thinking how much I appreciate driving in Europe. European drivers are some of the best I've seen, and I think some of the best in the world. And I'm hoping to explain why I believe so in this video.
Yeah, come on, let's hear it.
Now, I haven't done any research. This is just my experience, so if I'm wrong about anything, please correct me in the comments. This is just my perspective, having lived in Europe for 2 years, having driven mostly around Western European countries, such as Netherlands, Switzerland, France, Germany, UK, and in the US, I primarily have driven in Florida. So Florida's not exactly known for the best drivers, especially we get a lot of tourists who don't know how to drive in the US, and a lot of elderly folks, and just people who don't know the right rules of the road. So that's my benchmark, that's what I'm comparing against. One of the main reasons I think European drivers are better is just driving in general is a privilege. So if you look at most European places, most European cities, you don't need a car. You don't need to drive anywhere.
Oh, because they want to drive.
Public transportation is well established. You can use a train, a metro, a tram to get pretty much anywhere you need to go. You can use public transportation to get pretty much anywhere. So you don't really need to drive. Only if you live in more suburban parts of Europe, but even then public transportation is still available. So Europeans don't have to drive. They want to drive. And because they want to drive, they're enjoying it. Into it. On top of that, getting a driver's license in most European countries is a much more involved and expensive process.
Oh,
for example,
expensive?
In the Netherlands, getting a driver's license can cost a couple €1,000 because you have to do mandatory driving lessons.
What?
On top of that, the age to get a driver's license is much older than most states in the US. So I believe in the Netherlands you can start learning to drive around 16 and a half years old. That's when you do your theory test and then you start doing driving lessons. You don't have a full driver's license without restrictions until you're 18 years old.
Yeah.
Compared to Florida, where I'm from, you start driving at 15. You do your theory test and you start driving at 15. And you only have to have a learner's permit for 1 year. And there's no mandatory driving lessons. Your parents can teach you how to drive.
Yeah.
On top of that, the cost in general for driving is much lower. Cost of getting a driver's license is much lower in the US. And driving is kind of a necessity in a lot of parts of the United States, except for major metropolitan cities. You have to drive. So getting a driver's license is less of a privilege in the US and more of a necessity.
Yeah. People have to do it even though they don't like it.
That distinction alone, I think, contributes to a lot of the differences that I'm going to point out. So getting a driver's license is a much more involved process, especially in countries like the Netherlands. In Germany, it also requires mandatory lessons. It costs a lot of money. So when they invest that much into getting a driver's license, they don't want to lose it. They learn to drive properly. They learn the right rules of the road. They don't want to do anything to jeopardize that, and they drive accordingly. You can see here in this example, I'm just outside of Amsterdam. There's nobody cruising in the left lane. I'm driving at 5:30 in the afternoon right now. Nobody is cruising in the left lane. The left lane is only for passing. You can see how people use the lanes.
It's true.
They're very well disciplined. And that's a common theme. They're well-disciplined drivers. This goes back to how they learn to drive. They have to take mandatory lessons. Their parents aren't teaching them to drive. Their parents aren't passing on bad habits about driving.
It's true.
They're learning the proper rules of the road. They're executing them while they learn to drive. So even though you take a theory test in the US on what the rules of the road are, you don't really remember that. You remember what you learned while you're driving. And oftentimes that's from what your parents taught you. And that's not the case in Europe. You'll see here the highway just widened up and people immediately start moving to the right. Not everybody, but most people do. Nobody's fighting, nobody's rushing. They're just following the rules. They're well disciplined.
Nobody's
Don't get me
rushing,
wrong,
that's true.
not everybody follows every rule. You can see there are some more aggressive drivers sometimes, but it's not the norm. And even
Yeah,
the
they're the
more aggressive
outliers.
ones tend to get on their way, get out of the way. They're not messing with anybody. They're not pissing anybody off. There's no real road rage. So discipline is one of those key important attributes. The next thing is the roads in general.
They're
The
better.
roads are well maintained. I'm going off of what I've seen in the Netherlands and Germany. Not every European country has the same privilege. I've seen some pretty poor roads in countries like Belgium.
Really?
And even I've heard in Italy roads aren't as nice. But you can see here the highway is well maintained. There are no
It's perfect.
potholes.
No.
It's quite wide, and people use the lanes correctly. So even though there's a lot of lanes, it allows for a lot of capacity because people actually follow the rules of the road. They stay to the right. They only pass on the left. They pass and then they get back over. And that's the general way it works here. So when they add more lanes, when the highway is wider, it allows for much more free-flowing traffic, a lot more capacity.
As it should be.
Unlike places like Houston where they added lanes, nobody follows proper rules there, so they continue to sit in the left lane, even if it's 16 lanes wide, and it doesn't help the traffic situation at all. In this area, this is a speed-controlled area, so it's actually controlled by average speed cameras. I'll deep dive into that in a separate video, but
What's
the
the limit?
Netherlands has some of the strictest speed laws in Europe.
Okay.
Talking about the rules of the road, when you look at truckers, they also follow the rules very strictly in Europe.
I think I have to be
They're
more
almost
strict.
always all the way to the right. They rarely are passing. There are zones where they're not allowed to pass. They're rarely in the left lane. They're rarely passing. When they do pass, they get back over to the right lane immediately. There's less clogging of traffic. So discipline, learning the rules of the road, following them, these are important themes. The process to get a driver's license is much more involved, much more strict. Another thing with driving in Europe, in my opinion, the cars are much more solid. They're much more roadworthy.
What?
You have vehicle inspections, so people can't drive old, beat-up cars. You have
okay.
to have your vehicle inspected ever so often. Depending on the age of the vehicle, it's either once a year or once every few years. There's rules about what the vehicle can or can't have equipped on it. It has to pass inspection for you to keep driving it on the road. So the roadworthiness of vehicles is also
Oh my
better.
god, roadworthiness
And some
of
states have this.
vehicles.
Florida in particular doesn't have this. So you see people driving on the highway with rickety vehicles that are falling apart.
Yeah, like you're just
they've
doing
gotten
whatever.
into an accident and they haven't fixed the vehicle. It's a road hazard, in my opinion. That doesn't happen
Depends.
here. People maintain their cars well in the first place. They have to maintain them well because to keep driving them on the road, they have to pass the inspections. Germany has some of the strictest inspection laws. You can see many videos on YouTube about passing the TÜV inspection.
Oh
I
my
haven't
god,
had to go
that's-
through this personally in the Netherlands, but I do know that inspections.
Oh my god, that's so
are
stressful.
required. I haven't seen any, poorly maintained vehicles on the road. And because of this, because of the discipline, because of the roadworthiness of the vehicles, generally Europe has higher speed limits. The Netherlands used to have a national speed limit on the highway of 130 kilometers an hour, which equates to 81 miles per hour.
Wow.
People used to drive faster than that. Recently, as of March of 2020, there's a national speed limit of 100 kilometers an hour until 7 p.m.
Well, that's
Some roads are still 100 kilometers per hour in general.
but
I'll do a
100
separate
it's
deep
kinda
dive
slow,
into
I
that in
think.
another video
I
about
don't
the
know.
Netherlands. But in general, countries like Germany or France, the highest speed limit you'll see on suburban highways is 130 kilometers an hour. And people drive faster than that. You can easily drive 140.
Oh my
kilometers
god,
an hour
hold
without
on.
any issue.
Calm
And again,
down.
if everybody follows these rules of the road, driving that fast, even on narrow highways,
Isn't it
an
dangerous?
issue. You can also see in the Autobahn, people driving much faster than that. It's a 2-lane highway, yet there's very little accidents.
That's crazy
And
to
that goes
me.
back to the discipline of following the rules of the road. People keep to the right, even if somebody is driving faster than you, it's completely safe. I'll have to do another video about the Autobahn because that's a whole experience in and of itself. As an American, I truly love and appreciate the Autobahn, and I wish that America had that privilege, but honestly, the drivers don't deserve it.
Oh my god, they don't deserve
Another
it.
reason
That's
driving
harsh.
in Europe is so much better. Again, going back to the discipline, you'll see this as a common theme. There's very little distracted driving. People are focused on driving while they're driving. They're not on their phones.
But it goes with
they're
the
not
discipline.
eating, they're not really drinking coffee. They're not reading a book. They're not doing all of these crazy things you see people in America do while they drive.
Wow,
They're
drinking a
focused
coffee.
on driving. And they
It's not
have to
that
be
bad.
focused on driving. You're not allowed to be using your phone. You're not allowed to
That's
be eating
true.
while you're driving. You're not allowed to be doing anything but driving while you're driving. In fact, in the Netherlands, they started rolling out a system where there are cameras over the highways that will look at cars and take pictures. If you're caught driving while you're on your phone or doing something while you're distracted while you're driving,
They can
they'll
find
actually
you.
mail you a ticket.
Okay.
So they're very strict about enforcing no distracted driving.
I have so
people
many questions
follow it.
about that.
People focus on driving. And when you focus on driving and you have drivers that are focused on driving, you can have much more freedom and much
Yeah.
more driving enjoyment. So distracted driving isn't really a thing here, and it's really well enforced. I think that helps contribute to some of the driving characteristics of some of the roads. People are much more focused. So there aren't really distractions while you're driving. You're focused on driving, you're paying attention, and this is part of the reason why there are some things you really need to pay attention to while you're driving in Europe. Things like roundabouts, things like speed humps, things like pedestrian zones, bicycle lanes, trams, buses,
Yeah, there's a lot of things.
horses that are allowed to be in traffic, a lot of different things that you need to pay attention
What?
to, and that's why you really need to pay attention while you're driving. And Europeans do in general. Now, as an American driving in Europe, I am guilty of carrying over some of my bad habits about distracted driving. But
Like what?
when I need to pay attention, I pay attention. And I've always thought of that in the US as well. I pay attention while I'm driving. I focus on driving. I get pleasure out of that. And that's the norm here in Europe. You drive when you're driving. You're not doing anything else. It's not a time when you're, catching up on emails or reading a book. Or
Come on,
eating your
stop with the
lunch.
read. You can't read a book you're
You
driving.
can see here, this is one of these roads that's almost one car width wide.
Yeah, it's very small.
It shares a bicycle lane. And this is a bi-directional road. You really have to pay attention here. You have to mind the space. If a car's coming in the other direction, you have to squeeze to the right and make sure there's enough space.
And what happens if there's a
But
bike
when
there?
the road is empty like this, you can enjoy it. One difference with Europe, generally people don't use cars to commute. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people that do commute to work by car in Europe and European cities, but in general, cost of parking is very expensive. Fuel is very expensive. People
Yeah.
don't use a car to commute if they don't have to. So people will often defer to public transportation to get to work. So people aren't driving regularly as much as they do in the US. So usually when they're driving, it's for pleasure, not so much necessity. Of course, it's maybe necessity to go somewhere, but they're focused on driving while they're doing it. It's not part of their morning commute. And this is generally speaking, this is my take. It's not scientific, of course. I like that I can choose to drive when I want to drive. I
It's
can
about
enjoy
choosing, yeah.
driving. I'm lucky that I live in Amsterdam. I don't have to commute. I don't have to commute by car. Another thing I've noticed is when people are towing something or carrying cargo, it's well secured, it's covered with a net. Things don't fly out of trucks, things don't fly out of trailers. People, when they're towing something or
hazard.
when they're carrying something or hauling something, they're staying to the right, they're driving in the slower lane, they're not passing anybody, they're not driving erratically. I remember regularly seeing in Florida landscaping trucks with trailers with things that are just bouncing around, flying around, things that could fly off of the trailer in any second. And those guys are driving 80-something miles an hour in the passing lane, passing cars, driving erratically. That just doesn't happen here. When you consider some of the points that I've mentioned, driving in Europe is overall safer. If people follow the rules, it makes for a safer experience for cars, for pedestrians, for
for
cyclists.
everyone.
It also makes for a better driving experience as a driver. And that's why I love driving in Europe. After a long road trip, I don't feel exhausted. I don't feel like I was dealing with a lot of bad drivers.
Yeah, like
I don't
you need a
feel like
break.
I was dealing with a lot of people sitting in the left lane. I don't feel that fatigue that you feel when you drive in America. I actually feel quite relaxed while I drive. And it's because there's similar people like me driving, people who want to drive, people who enjoy driving, people who pay attention while they're driving. So I feel like I'm sharing the road with a lot of like-minded individuals. I also feel like driving in Europe, I've become a better driver. I've learned things that I didn't learn in America. Roundabouts, for example, dealing with cyclists regularly. Like I said, this is my personal experience. It's definitely not fact. Let me know in the comments below what you think.
It's fact for you.
Thanks for watching.
Okay, so it was a little bit of what I was sort of expecting, because I think a lot of things he makes a really like great, excellent points, but I think it all comes down to, I think, what he said early in the beginning, that is all, well, he takes it further. He's like, well, it's a privilege. I don't know if it's a privilege, again, because I had no idea that apparently a driver's license in places like Germany can cost upwards to like 2,000 euros, even more. Like, that's crazy to me, that it's like, how are you going to spend like that much money in just like a driver's license? But it makes sense, I think, if he like, when you put it all into context, it's like, yeah, that's what he says is a privilege. Yeah, well, it's very expensive compared to other places where obviously you just go and get your driver's license and that's it. But I think it all comes down to, again, it's a privilege, but I wouldn't say maybe it's a privilege. I think there's more like when it comes to need. I think it's the crux of the matter is that in other places, in the United States, for instance, that you need a car. Like that's how it goes. Like, in order to live your life like properly, you're just gonna need a car because there's no good public transport. Like, there's not a good public transport system, or there are like bicycle lanes or whatever. For whatever reason, you do need a car, just because, again, if you want to live a life, you have to go to work, you have to like go to places, whatever, like you're going to need a car. So it's more born out of a necessity to actually drive a car, and not of a, actually enjoy driving. I'm thinking about getting my driver's license because I want to enjoy, driving around, and I like cars, I like driving. So it all comes down to that, I think. And I think that's probably like the most important thing. It's because it all stems from that. If you need a car in order to go to places, it's chaotic. We've seen like all the things that he was mentioning, like why it's bad to make it to go around like that. And he said, well, yeah, sadly it is, and that's the reality. It's because, again, you need to. It's born out of a necessity. So you're gonna have to drive a car, whether or not you like it, whether or not you're good at it, whether or not you've learned the right rules. Like, it doesn't matter. You're gonna have to. So that's why it's so chaotic, and that's why it's such a stressful experience driving in other roads compared to places like Europe, where it's like, no, it's not a necessity. I wouldn't say that much is a privilege, although that, it's a little bit of that, because obviously like it's very expensive. And obviously maintaining, like the cost of maintaining a car, it's even higher, because obviously fuel is, gas, it's more expensive. And apparently you need to have like a well-maintained car, apparently, in order to like pass the test of the road. So it's also, you need a good car. So you need to really pay a lot of money to actually like maintain your car in proper condition. So again, in that part, I guess, obviously it's a privilege, but maybe you can rent a car. Maybe if you don't have that much money, maybe you can just rent a car. But again, you're going to the lengths of like, I'm renting a car. It's because, well, I already spent money, getting my license, and you really do need apparently you also need to have lessons. It's not, again, it's just like that someone teach you, like a brother, a sister, an older sibling, or a parent or a grandparent. It's like, no, you need it to have lessons, and obviously lessons cost money. So it's like, well, yeah, it takes effort on your part. It's not like you need to, and it's like a rite of passage everywhere else, basically, because you need a car to be a proper functioning adult. So it's like, yeah, well, I think that's the big difference. It's born of a necessity and not a privilege, and not because it's not a choice. It's, you have to. So that's, I think, the biggest difference, and that's, everything stems from that, actually, I think, because again, if you don't like it, it's like, well, too bad, you're gonna have to, because there's no good public transport system. So unless you move out somewhere like NYC, like to Manhattan, where they have like a good subway system, it's like you're gonna have to drive. So, and again, especially him, like he's from Orlando, I think, from Florida, and it's like, obviously it's again, you're gonna have to drive, either whether or not you like it, whether or not you have a beat up car that can barely like go around in the highway, like I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to. So it is, I think everything comes from that, and obviously that creates like drivers that are maybe not that good, people that don't really follow the rules or don't really know the rules to begin with, and that's why it's such a stressful system. And also I think obviously the roads, I think they're a pretty big part of it, but I think it's more about the people. You know, if you ask me, I think it's more about the people, and because the roads are, well, you know, obviously better roads lead to like better less accidents and better drivers, because it's like, oh, it's a dream driving in here, like it's such a soothing experience that I'm not like super stressed because, oh, there's a bunch of potholes and I have to be like, and you know, the roads are nicer. So obviously that does create a difference, but I think probably the biggest one is that, you know, it's like you want to have to drive, and I think that's the difference. And that's the solution. You know, they have good public transport, a good public transport system. They have bikes, they have other options. They have subway, buses, and other things. Probably just walking as well. You know, that's an option. So it's all about options. And if you don't have options, then you create the chaos that is the United States traffic system. So it was very interesting, and I do agree with a lot of things, even though he said like, oh, you know, it's just, obviously it's not a matter of fact of like, hey, it's a scientific study that they've done, it's all just, you know, it's experience and so like empiric. But I totally agree with him, because it's, yeah, once you lay out the facts, it's like I'm totally with you. It's like, yeah, you know what, you're totally right. I had no idea, like I would have guessed, you know, I would think it was maybe yes, because they have more options. But come to think about it, I think a big part of it is also what he said about like wanting to drive. It's more in Europe, it's like, again, because it's all the reasons that I mentioned, and because it's so expensive and stuff, it's like people don't really, you're not going to find drivers on the road that they're there because they need to. You're probably going to find people that they do want to drive because they like the actual act of driving. They love cars or whatever. Maybe they don't like cars, but they do like the act of driving of like an open road or whatever. And that's what you're going to get. Even though, of course, he said, of course they're out there. So you're going to find crazy people, you can find crazy people everywhere basically. But it's like, it's less so, you know, yeah, I totally agree. So I have so many questions about the whole like inspection system. Apparently, like they inspect your car. I'm wondering like how like, is it yearly? He said a few years. Maybe if you have a newer car, they come check your car less. It's like, well, we'll see you in 3 years. But it's kind of crazy. I think I've heard of that before, but I didn't know it was like actually implemented, that people like the government or some agency of the sort really does come and tell you like, we need to check out your car to see if you need to still be driving this. So I've never heard of it. I'm always so interested to know like what the inspection system is like, and also what the actual, you know, is it the driving tests look quite scary. Like, well, the driving tests are scary in general, but in this one, because apparently like it's such a big deal, then it's like, oh my god, you know, like it looks scary. And I think obviously it depends on each country, but you know, it's a quite a nerve-wracking experience, and I think it's probably going to be harder to pass the test in, you know, in a European country that is probably in the United States or in somewhere else. So, you know, it's quite something. But also I think I have to say, he was like, oh, people are actually, you know, driving, you know, with their hands on the wheel looking straight ahead. He's like, you're not going to be reading a book, obviously. No, you're driving, but it's more about, well, you can be drinking coffee. He was like, you can't even be drinking coffee. He's like, you can drink some coffee while you're driving. I don't think that makes you such a huge, like a terrible driver if you're just like drinking coffee or just like grabbing a bite to eat. But apparently that's super frowned upon, at least in the Netherlands, or I don't know if Europe in general, or it was like a thing that he, like, if I'm seeing a driver like eat a bagel or something, I'm judging them. It's like, okay, I don't know if I think that's a step too far. I wouldn't go that far, but you know, to each their own. But you know, now I'm scared. I'm like, if I'm ever driving in Europe, I know not to grab coffee or to eat something. Just like, I'm here. I'm totally with you. Because again, you can be like grabbing a bite to eat and still being, you know, you're still going to be aware of everything that's happening to you, and you're still going to be a good driver. It's not that you're just gonna, it's like you're eating pasta or something where, I don't know, or you're drinking alcohol and you're just like super like not into what's happening on the road. But I don't know. So maybe that's a little bit of a step too far, but well, I don't know. But yeah, this was very interesting video. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'll see you next time. Bye.